Some mornings just feel heavier than others. You wake up and, for a split second, everything seems normal until the ache in your chest reminds you that nothing is the same anymore. That was me, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the engagement ring still clinging to my finger like it hadn't gotten the memo. Ethan and I had been together for 5 years. 5 whole years of building a life together, adopting our cat Mochi, planning cheap road trips, sharing inside jokes about terrible sitcoms. 8 months ago, on a windy morning hike to our favorite lookout in Austin, he pulled out a small ring box with trembling hands, and I said yes without hesitation. We set the wedding date for October, started slow planning, or maybe, looking back, it was mostly me planning. At first, the little things didn't seem like much. Ethan was busy at work. He managed projects for an interior design company, and with their biggest contracts yet, his stress level was off the charts. I figured delayed text replies and disinterest in floral arrangements were just part of that. After all, not every guy dreams about napkin colors and seating charts. But over the past 3 months, the distance between us had stretched thin and brittle. When I texted him about cake tastings, he'd reply hours later with a half-hearted, whatever you want. If I tried to talk to him about finalizing guest lists, he'd mumble something about budget concerns or needing to think about it. I tried not to push. Everyone said guys got cold feet. Maybe this was just Ethan's version of nerves. Last Friday, I decided we needed a reset, a night to remember why we chose each other in the first place. I put on a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in forever, the one Ethan once said made me look like a movie star, and made a dinner reservation at this cozy Italian place downtown. I even stocked the fridge with his favorite craft beer for afterward. I wanted so badly to reconnect. Instead, I got blindsided. At dinner, Ethan barely looked up from his phone. He picked at his food, offered short answers when I tried to make conversation, and kept glancing toward the door like he couldn't wait to leave. When I brought up finalizing our honeymoon plans, he leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, "I don't know, Margot. I'm not sure I'm ready for any of this." My heart sank so fast it felt like it knocked the air out of me. 5 years. 5 years of shared birthdays, hospital visits, lost jobs, new jobs, lazy Sunday mornings with Mochi curled between us. And now, 3 months from the wedding, he wasn't sure. I tried to stay calm, to not cause a scene in the middle of a crowded restaurant, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my fork. I asked him if he was serious, if he meant he wasn't ready to get married, or if he wasn't sure about me. He mumbled something about things changing and how Paul, his ever-charming work buddy, kept reminding him that marriage wasn't what it used to be. "Things get messy," he said, as if that explained anything. We barely touched our entrees. We didn't order dessert. The ride home was suffocating, both of us locked in separate, silent storms. At the apartment, Ethan grabbed a blanket off the couch and said he needed space to think. Space. Like the last 5 years of my life were a cluttered room he wanted to clear out. I locked myself in the bedroom with Mochi and cried into the pillow until I couldn't breathe. I told myself it was just fear, pre-wedding jitters, stress, anything but what my gut was screaming, that the ground beneath my life was crumbling. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and an even puffier heart. Ethan had already left to meet Paul and some friends at a bar called the Rusty Nail. Like nothing had happened, like my world hadn't been upended just hours ago. Sophie, my best friend since college, called and dragged me out for coffee. Bless her stubborn heart. She sat across from me in a tiny booth at Starbucks, holding my hand while I tried to string words together. She said the things best friends are supposed to say. That maybe Ethan was scared but would come around. That we should talk it out when he sobered up. I nodded along, but inside something felt fundamentally wrong. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. When I got back to our apartment later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from Mason, one of Ethan's coworkers. We'd only met a few times at company parties, but he was friendly enough. The message simply said, "Hey, are you okay? Things got kinda weird at the Rusty Nail. Thought you should know." My stomach flipped. I called Mason immediately, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the ring. When he picked up, he sounded hesitant, awkward, like he didn't want to be the one to say it. But after a little pushing, Mason told me Ethan had been drinking with the guys. They teased him about the wedding, about being tied down. Paul asked him if he was really ready for forever with me, and Ethan, my Ethan, laughed and said, "If she were prettier, maybe I'd be more excited about marrying her." He said it like a joke, a joke. I sat in the parking lot outside our apartment complex, clutching the steering wheel, the world spinning sideways around me. 5 years, 8 months engaged, and the man I loved thought it was funny to blame my face for his cold feet. When I finally stumbled inside, Ethan was passed out on the couch, the smell of stale beer hanging heavy in the air. Mochi jumped into my arms as if she knew. I locked us both in the bedroom again, turned my phone to silent, and buried myself under the covers. I didn't want to hear another apology. I didn't want another breakfast made with guilty hands. I didn't want Ethan's half-truths anymore. I wanted to wake up and not feel like I was drowning in someone else's bad choices. The next few days passed in a kind of fog. I stayed at my brother Noah's apartment, crashing on his old futon, surrounded by boxes of his gym equipment and half-finished DIY projects. It wasn't glamorous, but at least it wasn't filled with memories of Ethan. Noah didn't press me for details. He just handed me a spare key, ordered pizza, and put on some ridiculous action movie neither of us actually watched. Every time he caught me staring blankly at the wall, he'd just nudge the pizza box closer to me without a word. Sometimes the best kind of love is the one that doesn't demand explanations. Meanwhile, Ethan's text piled up on my phone. "I'm so sorry. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. Please come home, we can fix this." I couldn't bring myself to respond. What do you say to someone who thinks you're not pretty enough is just drunken guy humor? Sophie called every night, checking in, trying to convince me to get some air, to eat something, to not lose myself completely in the heartbreak. But even Target runs and trashy reality TV couldn't numb the gnawing question inside me. Was I really not enough? It's embarrassing to admit, but I started obsessively looking at old photos of us. Photos from vacations, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings with messy hair and coffee mugs. In every picture, I could see it now, the slow fade. His smile not quite reaching his eyes. His arm around me just a little too loose. Had it been obvious to everyone but me? I kept remembering the way he used to look at me when we first met, like I was the only person in a room full of noise. Somewhere along the line, that gaze had shifted, softened, dulled. I thought about the ring still on my finger, about how he'd knelt on that rocky hilltop and promised me forever, and about how he'd sat in a bar with his friends and laughed about how maybe forever would have been easier if I'd just been prettier. By Monday morning, I couldn't pretend anymore. I called in sick to work, my voice cracking as I left a voicemail for my boss. I couldn't imagine sitting behind the reception desk at the dental office, smiling at patients and pretending my life wasn't falling apart. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marlene, Ethan's mom. We'd always had a weirdly close relationship, more maternal than my own mom who lived states away with her third husband. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me needed answers I didn't know how to ask for. Marlene was crying. She asked if we could meet somewhere. She said there was something important I needed to know, something Ethan hadn't told me. Her voice cracked when she said it, and suddenly the little part of me still hoping this was all a misunderstanding shriveled up and died. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside a small coffee shop near downtown, clutching a lukewarm latte I hadn't touched. What could possibly be worse than what I already knew? What could she say that would make any of this make sense? When Marlene walked in, she looked different, tired, like she hadn't slept. She didn't waste time on small talk. She slid into the booth across from me, took a deep, shaky breath, and said, "Ethan hasn't been honest with you about a lot of things." She told me that over the past few months, Ethan had developed feelings for someone else, a woman he worked with, a project coordinator named Olivia. According to Marlene, nothing physical had happened, but there had been texting, lunches that didn't seem entirely professional. Ethan had called Marlene in tears the night before, confessing everything in a drunken spiral of guilt and fear. I sat there, my mind refusing to compute the words coming out of her mouth. Olivia. The name sounded like a punchline to a cruel joke. I remembered meeting her once, briefly, at a company party. She was pretty in a polished, effortless way, the kind of woman who looked good even in khakis and a company polo. Marlene kept talking, but I barely heard her. I was too busy cataloging every moment over the past few months when Ethan had been distant, distracted, disinterested. I'd blamed work stress, I'd blamed wedding anxiety, I'd blamed myself, when really, deep down, he'd been pulling away for a long time, because of her. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the realization that Ethan hadn't trusted me enough to tell me he was scared, that he'd rather lie, humiliate me, destroy everything we built, than face the truth like an adult. By the time Marlene reached across the table to squeeze my hand, I was numb. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "You deserve so much better than this." And the thing is, for the first time in a long time, a tiny voice inside me agreed. After that meeting with Marlene, I didn't go back to Noah's place. I just drove. No destination, no plan, just me, the hum of the highway, and the sound of my heart breaking over and over again in my chest. I thought about everything Marlene had told me, about Ethan's emotional affair, about how he was too much of a coward to come clean, about how, even after everything, he still tried to act like this was our problem, something we could work through instead of admitting it was a mess he created all on his own. When I finally pulled over into a grocery store parking lot somewhere on the edge of town, I sat in the car and cried so hard my body ached from it. It wasn't just about Ethan. It was about all the ways I had betrayed myself, all the times I bit my tongue when something felt wrong, all the excuses I made when his affection started fading, all the ways I twisted myself into a smaller, quieter version of who I used to be, just to keep us together. And for what? A man who, when faced with real fear and responsibility, chose to humiliate me in a bar full of people instead of facing his own demons. When the tears finally ran dry, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Ethan's fear define me. I wasn't going to let this define me. I needed to confront him. Not for closure, not to win him back, but for me. Because I deserved answers. I deserved honesty, even if it hurt. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I texted Sophie and Noah to let them know where I'd be. Safety net, just in case. I drove back to the apartment Ethan and I shared, the apartment that still had the wedding planning binders stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, mocking me. When I walked in, he was there, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, looking more like a scared boy than the man I thought I knew. I stayed standing near the door. I didn't trust myself to get too close. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot, voice shaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I don't even know where to start." I stayed silent, giving him the chance to say what he needed to say. And slowly, painfully, he did. He admitted the emotional connection to Olivia, admitted that he let his insecurities fester instead of talking to me, admitted that when Paul started making jokes about freedom and being tied down, he played along because it was easier than standing up for what he really wanted. He said he didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to be honest, that he was terrified of ending up like his father, cheating, abandoning, destroying everything good in his life. I listened. I nodded when it made sense. I asked questions when it didn't. And when he finally ran out of words, I asked the one question that had been eating away at me since that night at the Rusty Nail. "Were you ever really sure about us, or were you just sure it was better than being alone?" He flinched like I'd slapped him, and then he said the one thing I hadn't realized I needed to hear. "I thought I was sure, until I realized I was more scared of losing you than I was sure about building a life with you." That hurt. It hurt worse than the comment at the bar, worse than hearing about Olivia, worse than any text he could have sent, because it meant that, all along, I wasn't his first choice. I was just the safe one. The familiar one, the easy one, and I refused to be that for anyone anymore. I told him I needed space. Real space. No texts, no late-night guilt trips, no apologies wrapped in desperation. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and I could see he finally understood. It was too late. As I packed up a bag and prepared to leave, he said, "I do love you, Margot." And for the first time, I didn't say it back, because love without honesty isn't love, it's fear. And I was done living in fear. Healing is such a strange thing. It doesn't come all at once, like a switch flipping. It creeps in slowly, like sunlight inching across a room you thought would stay dark forever. The first thing I did after leaving our apartment was turn off my phone. Not airplane mode, not silent, completely off. I couldn't deal with the endless buzzing of apologies, regrets, or well-meaning advice. I needed quiet. I needed to hear my own voice again. Sophie took me in without a second thought. Her apartment was small, cluttered in the cozy way that felt like an embrace. Piles of books by the couch, half-finished crochet projects on every surface. The soft hum of her cat Pepper purring from somewhere under the bed. The first few days were rough. I cried over everything. The smell of Ethan's hoodie I found in my overnight bag, the half-used jar of wedding planning stickers, the stupid bride-to-be mug Sophie had bought me last Christmas. But Sophie never made me feel ridiculous. She just let me cry. And when the tears ran out, she made grilled cheese and put on old Disney movies until I laughed without meaning to. Noah checked in constantly too, dropping off groceries, forwarding emails from the apartment complex about lease details, offering to accidentally run into Ethan at the gym if I needed someone to break his nose. Typical big brother stuff. It made me feel safe in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. Marlene reached out too. So did Bella, Ethan's sister. They both apologized in ways that felt real, not just for Ethan's behavior, but for not noticing sooner how much he was struggling and how much that struggle was bleeding into our relationship. It would have been easy to cut them off, to lump them into the everything associated with Ethan must go pile. But something inside me knew they weren't just his family anymore. They were mine too, in some messy, beautiful way. And they loved me enough to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. One night, about 2 weeks after everything imploded, I found myself sitting alone on Sophie's tiny balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, I let myself wonder, who am I when I'm not someone's girlfriend, someone's fiancée, someone's future wife? The answer didn't come easily. I'd spent so much time folding myself into Ethan's life that I didn't even know where my edges ended and his began. I decided to start small, simple promises to myself. I would take my morning walks again, the ones Ethan used to complain about because weekends are for sleeping in. I would buy the bright red lipstick I always wanted but stopped wearing because Ethan said it was too much. I would plan a trip alone because I didn't need a honeymoon to justify seeing the world. Healing wasn't glamorous. It was crying into a bowl of cereal at 2 a.m. It was canceling wedding vendors and explaining to confused relatives that there would be no big white dress, no October vows. It was deleting our shared playlists, one song at a time, each click a tiny heartbreak, but it was also freeing in the smallest, softest ways. One night, while scrolling through old photos, I found a picture of myself from years ago, standing on a mountain trail, messy hair, flushed cheeks, grinning like I could swallow the whole sky. I barely recognized her. But I wanted to. I wanted to find my way back to that girl. Maybe not exactly the same. Maybe a little bruised, a little wiser, but still bright, still me. Sophie joked that I was in my main character era now. I laughed, but a small, stubborn part of me wanted to believe her. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything. Maybe it was just the end of a chapter. Maybe the best parts of my story hadn't even been written yet. 3 months later, I stood in the tiny kitchen of my new apartment, barefoot, hair in a messy bun, dancing like a fool to some old pop song blasting from my Bluetooth speaker. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The apartment wasn't much, just a little one-bedroom across town, farther from work but closer to something else I couldn't quite name yet. Maybe freedom, maybe peace. The walls were bare except for a few framed prints I found at a flea market. The couch was secondhand, sagging a little in the middle. The shower temperature fluctuated between Antarctica and sun's core without warning, but it was mine. Every dish in the cabinets, every cheap throw pillow, every stubborn herb plant fighting for life on the balcony, it all belonged to this new version of me. A version still healing, still figuring it out, but no longer willing to live half a life just to make someone else comfortable. Ethan and I had exchanged our final texts a month ago. Civil, practical, dividing up the last of our shared bills, making arrangements about Mochi. She stayed with me, of course. There was never any question about that. No messy fights, no dramatic goodbyes, just an ending. An ending that, somehow, made room for beginnings I never would have dared dream about while trapped in the cycle of loving someone who wasn't ready to love me back. Sophie and Noah stayed close, my anchors. Marlene and Bella kept sending little check-in messages, memes, and invites for coffee. They didn't ask invasive questions. They didn't prod at the wounds. They just showed up in all the small, quiet ways that real love does. And me, I started showing up for myself too. I went on solo hikes every Saturday morning, breathing in the crisp air at sunrise without anyone grumbling beside me. I took a pottery class at the local community center, laughing at the lopsided bowl I made on my first try. I started a savings account labeled Adventure Fund, even if it only had $78 in it so far. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I cooked messy, extravagant dinners for one. And I went on that trip, the non-honeymoon, as Sophie called it. 10 days by the coast, in a tiny rental cottage with a deck that overlooked endless waves. The first night was the hardest. The silence was so big it almost swallowed me whole. I sat on the deck wrapped in a blanket, clutching a mug of tea, watching the sun sink into the ocean, feeling the ache of everything I'd lost. But then, something shifted. Not all at once, not like a movie scene where the music swells and the character has a grand epiphany. It was quieter than that. It was the realization that I was still here, still breathing, still dreaming, still capable of building a life that was full and bright and messy and mine. One morning, about halfway through the trip, I woke up early and walked down to the beach. The tide was coming in, the sand cool and damp under my feet. I stood there, letting the wind whip my hair around, watching the endless horizon. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. I felt limitless. That's the thing about heartbreak. It feels like the end of the world. But sometimes it's just the world cracking open wide enough for you to step into something bigger. I don't have all the answers yet. I'm not going to pretend every day is perfect. There are still moments when the loneliness creeps in, when I wonder if I'll ever find someone who sees me, really sees me, and stays. But now, I know I won't settle for anything less than that. I deserve to be loved fiercely, without hesitation, without cruelty disguised as jokes, without doubts masked as silence. And if that love never comes from someone else, I know I can give it to myself, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time. And now, sitting here in my little apartment, laptop balanced on my knees, coffee cooling beside me, I find myself wondering, if you were me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Would you have fought harder for something already broken? Or would you have chosen yourself, the way I finally did? I'd love to hear your thoughts, because maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needs to be reminded too. You are enough, you have always been enough. And you don't have to wait for someone else to see it before you start living like it's true.